I need to tell someone about this. And I guess writing it all out might help me figure out where everything went so wrong. 7 years ago, I met Julian at this little bistro downtown where he was working as a line cook. The moment I saw him, something just clicked. He had this passionate way of talking about food, about flavors and techniques. And when he smiled at me from behind the pass, I swear I felt my heart skip. It sounds ridiculous now, but I genuinely thought I'd found my soulmate. We were perfect together in the beginning. I was in law school, grinding through my classes and dreaming of a real career. And Julian was working his way up in the kitchen, talking about eventually opening his own place. He'd cook these incredible meals for me after my long study sessions, and we'd sit on his tiny apartment balcony, planning our future together. 2 years of pure bliss. Honestly, when he proposed, I didn't hesitate for a second. The first few years of marriage were everything I'd hoped for. We supported each other's dreams. I was still plugging away at school, and Julian had worked his way up to sous chef at a really respected restaurant. We talked about kids, about the house we'd buy, about the restaurant he'd open once I was established in my career. Everything felt possible. Then the pandemic hit right when I found out I was pregnant. Everything changed overnight. I had to quit my part-time job because of health concerns, and Julian's restaurant cut way back on hours. But he stepped up in a way that honestly made me fall in love with him all over again. He picked up work as a line cook at whatever places were still operating. And when that wasn't enough, he started driving for Uber Eats between shifts. Some nights he'd come home exhausted at 2 o'clock in the morning, smelling like fryer oil and car air freshener, but he never complained, not once. Our son was born right in the thick of everything. And Julian was incredible. He'd work double shifts and then come home and take the night feeding so I could sleep. He learned how to make baby food from scratch, research sleep schedules, did all those things that honestly I couldn't have handled on my own. I was grateful, genuinely grateful for having a partner who would sacrifice so much for our family. When things started opening up again, I was determined to finish law school and finally start the career I'd put on hold. Julian encouraged me every step of the way, picking up extra delivery shifts to cover childcare costs, helping me study for the bar exam. While our toddler napped, the day I found out I'd passed, he was more excited than I was. He kept saying how proud he was, how I was going to change our whole lives. That's when I met Sadie. She was this sharp, confident woman in her 30s who'd just gone through a divorce and landed at the law firm where I'd been hoping to get hired. When she heard I was looking for opportunities, she immediately offered to put in a word with the partner. You're exactly what this place needs. She told me over coffee. Fresh energy, hungry for success, not like these other women who treat their careers like hobbies. Sade helped me get the interview, and within a week, I had an offer. The salary was more than Julian and I had ever imagined possible, and suddenly our whole financial picture changed overnight. I was finally going to be contributing something meaningful, something that mattered. The firm was everything I dreamed of and more: high stakes cases, important clients, the kind of work that actually made a difference in the world. And the people there were just different from anyone I'd known before, especially Alex. He was one of the senior partners, probably in his early 40s, with this commanding presence that just filled a room. Tall, broad shoulders, the kind of confidence that comes from real success. When he spoke in meetings, everyone listened. When he walked down the hall, conversations stopped. About 3 months into the job, I realized something had to change at home. I was working 60-hour weeks, staying late for client dinners and networking events, and Julian was still treating his cooking job like it was equally important to what I was doing. It was honestly getting embarrassing trying to explain to my colleagues that my husband was a line cook when they were talking about their spouses' careers in finance and medicine. The conversation didn't go as smoothly as I'd hoped. I sat Julian down one evening and explained that it made more sense for him to be a stay-at-home dad now that my salary could support us comfortably. Think about it, I said. You'd get to spend all day with our son, and I could really focus on building something significant at the firm. It's a win-win. He looked uncomfortable, started talking about how much he loved cooking, how he'd been hoping to work his way up to head chef, but honestly, that was exactly the problem. He was thinking small, thinking about some little restaurant kitchen, while I was building a career that could actually set our family up for life. Julian, I said, trying to be patient, this is our chance. to really make something of ourselves. My career has unlimited potential. We can't waste that opportunity. It took a few more conversations, but he eventually agreed. And I have to admit, it was nice having him handle all the domestic stuff so I could really throw myself into work. No more worrying about daycare pickup times or whose turn it was to do grocery shopping. Julian took care of all of that, which freed me up to take on bigger cases, to stay late when important clients needed attention, to really prove myself. The firm had this culture of after work socializing that was basically mandatory if you wanted to advance. Drinks with clients, networking events, dinners that went until midnight. It was all part of building the relationships that made the real money. Sadi helped me navigate it all, introducing me to the right people, teaching me how to work the room. You're so much more sophisticated than most of the other associates, she'd tell me. You actually understand that success requires sacrifice. Some of these other women, they're always running home to their husbands, like their children who can't survive without mommy. Alex started including me in higher level meetings, asking for my input on strategy, treating me like a real colleague instead of just another junior associate. He had this way of making everyone around him feel special, like they were part of something important. When he complimented my work, it meant something. When he asked my opinion, I knew he actually valued what I had to say. Meanwhile, things at home were getting increasingly frustrating. Julian had completely settled into this domestic role that honestly made me uncomfortable. He'd gotten obsessed with organic baby food recipes and toddler developmental milestones. He'd greet me at the door, wanting to tell me about some cute thing our son had done or asking my opinion about preschool options when all I wanted to do was decompress from actual important decisions I'd been making all day. The worst part was how he'd gotten so needy for validation. He'd cook these elaborate dinners and then hover around waiting for me to compliment him like he was a child showing off a finger painting. I'd be trying to review case files or return client calls, and he'd be asking if I noticed that he'd used a new seasoning blend or whatever. It was honestly suffocating. Our physical relationship had basically disappeared, which I'm sure he blamed on my work schedule. But the truth was, I just wasn't attracted to this version of him anymore. The man I'd married had ambition, had drive. This person who got excited about playgroup politics and whether our son was eating enough vegetables felt like a stranger, a soft, needy stranger who wanted me to pretend his domestic achievements were as important as my actual career. Alex, on the other hand, was everything Julian used to be and more. He had that hunger, that edge that comes from competing at the highest levels. When we worked late on cases together, I felt more intellectually stimulated than I had in years. He understood the pressure, understood what it took to succeed in a world where weakness got you eaten alive. It started innocently enough, a hand on my shoulder when he was reviewing my work, compliments that felt more personal than professional, invitations to client dinners that were technically business, but felt like something more. Alex had this way of making me feel like I was special, like I was different from all the other women who'd probably thrown themselves at him over the years. Sadi noticed the chemistry before I was even willing to admit it to myself. He's completely smitten with you, she told me one evening after we'd all been out for drinks. And honestly, Maya, you deserve someone who can match your energy, someone who gets what you're building here. The first time Alex kissed me, we were working late on a case that had to be filed the next morning. Everyone else had gone home, and we were alone in the conference room, surrounded by documents and takeout containers. He had been standing behind me, looking over my shoulder at something on my laptop, and when I turned to ask him a question, his face was right there. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he leaned in, and everything I'd been trying to ignore just exploded. I should have stopped it there. I should have pulled away, reminded him that I was married, that this was unprofessional. But God, it felt so good to be desired by someone like him, someone powerful and confident and completely, utterly masculine in a way that Julian just wasn't anymore. The affair developed quickly after that. Alex was everything I'd been missing: passionate, demanding, completely sure of himself. He made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. When we were together, I felt like the woman I was supposed to be, not the domesticated suburban wife I'd somehow become. Julian had no idea what was happening, which honestly just proved how disconnected we'd become. He was so wrapped up in his little domestic world that he didn't notice I was getting home later and later, that I'd stopped making any effort to be affectionate, that I basically only spoke to him when necessary. He'd try to initiate conversations about our relationship, but I just didn't have the energy to pretend anymore. "You seem distant lately," he'd say, using that concerned voice that had started grating on my nerves. "Is everything okay with us?" How was I supposed to explain that I'd outgrown him, that I'd finally experienced what it felt like to be with a real man, and I couldn't go back to pretending his gentle, nurturing energy was enough for me? Julian had become everything I didn't want in a partner: predictable, domestic, completely lacking in the kind of raw masculinity that made Alex so intoxicating. Sadi kept encouraging me to follow my heart. Life is too short to waste on someone who doesn't appreciate what you really are. She'd say, "You're not the same person you were when you married. Julian, you've evolved and he hasn't. That's not your fault." She was right. I had evolved. The woman who'd fallen for a line cook with dreams was gone, replaced by someone who understood what real success looked like, what real power felt like. Julian represented everything I'd outgrown: small dreams, domestic priorities, the kind of soft masculinity that might have seemed sweet when I was younger, but now just felt weak. The breaking point came on a night when I got home from an incredible evening with Alex. We'd closed a major deal, celebrated with expensive wine, and ended up back at his place where he'd made me feel more desirable and powerful than I had in years. I walked into our house around midnight to find Julian waiting up for me, looking hurt and anxious. "Maya, we need to talk," he said. And something about his tone just set me off. Here I was, coming off one of the best nights I'd had in years, and he wanted to drag me into some needy conversation about his feelings. "I'm tired, Julian. Can this wait?" "No, it can't wait. I feel like I'm losing you. You're never here anymore. And when you are, it's like you can't stand to be around me and our son. This isn't what I thought our marriage would look like." The self-pity in his voice was just too much. "Our marriage looks like me building a career that can actually support this family while you play house. I'm sorry if that doesn't give you enough attention, but some of have real responsibilities. Real responsibilities. Taking care of our child isn't a real responsibility. Oh, please. You act like staying home with a 4-year-old is equivalent to what I do at the firm. It's not the same thing, Julian, and pretending it is just makes you look delusional." That's when something shifted in his expression, like he was finally seeing me clearly. "What happened to you, Maya? You used to care about our family. You used to care about me." And that's when I realized was done pretending, done acting like this pale shadow of a marriage was something worth preserving. What happened to me is that I grew up. I stopped settling for mediocrity. I found out what it feels like to be with someone who actually challenges me, who doesn't need me to coddle his ego every 5 minutes. Someone else? "Maya, are you having an affair?" There was no point in lying anymore. "Yes, and he's twice the man you'll ever be." The look on Julian's face should have made me feel guilty, but honestly, it just reinforced everything I'd been thinking about him. He just stood there, looking stunned and hurt, like a child who'd been told there's no Santa Claus. A real man would have gotten angry, would have fought back, but Julian just crumpled. "How long?" he asked, and his voice was so small and pathetic. "Long enough to know that this marriage is over. Alex is everything you're not, Julian. He's successful. He's confident. He's an actual alpha male who knows what a woman needs. You've become so feminine, so domestic that I honestly can't even remember why I married you. But our son can stay with me. He likes me better anyway. And let's be honest, he needs at least one parent who's actually accomplished something in life. Those weren't even real jobs you had, Julian. Playing with food and driving around, delivering other people's meals. That's not a career. That's what teenagers do for spending money. I moved out that week. Alex helped me find a beautiful apartment downtown close to the firm, the kind of place that actually reflected who I'd become. Julian handled the divorce paperwork without fighting me on anything, which was probably the first smart thing he'd done in years. He got our son, since apparently he wanted to continue playing Mr. Mom, and I got my freedom. The first year with Alex was everything I'd hoped for. We were the power couple I'd always wanted to be part of, two successful professionals who understood others' ambitions, who challenged each other intellectually and physically. He introduced me to his world of high-end restaurants and exclusive events, where I met other women who'd made the same choice I had, prioritizing their own growth over settling for comfortable mediocrity. My social media filled up with comments from friends and family praising me for being such a strong, independent woman. You're such an inspiration, Maya, living your best life. So proud of you for choosing happiness. It felt incredible to be seen as someone who'd had the courage to go after what she really wanted instead of staying trapped in a situation that was holding her back. Meanwhile, Julian was struggling in exactly the way I'd expected. Saudi heard through mutual friends that he'd spent 2 weeks crying, then had to beg for his old restaurant job back, and they'd only give him weekend shifts. He'd apparently started going to therapy, which honestly just proved my point about his emotional instability. A confident man doesn't need professional help to deal with life changes. Alex and I settled into a routine that felt sophisticated and adult in a way my marriage never had. We'd work late together, grab expensive dinners, spend weekends at his place, or traveling to other cities for work conferences that felt more like vacations. He had this incredible energy, this drive that pushed everyone around him to be better. When we walked into rooms together, people noticed. We commanded respect in a way that Julian and I never had. But after about a year, I started noticing things that made me uncomfortable. Alex had this way of looking at other women that reminded me uncomfortably of how he'd looked at me in the beginning. Young associates would join the firm, and suddenly he'd be just as charming and attentive with them as he'd been with me. When I brought it up, he'd laugh it off, tell me I was being insecure, remind me that his career required him to be friendly with everyone. You're not usually the jealous type, Maya, he'd say in that patronizing tone that made me feel small. It's not attractive. The worst part was that I could see myself becoming like the other women Alex had probably been with before me. Anxious, needy, constantly trying to prove that I was special enough to hold his attention. I'd worked so hard to avoid being that pathetic wife waiting at home for validation. And here I was, checking his phone when he was in the shower and analyzing every interaction he had with female colleagues. Things started deteriorating between us in ways that felt horribly familiar. He'd stay late at the office without inviting me, make plans with clients that didn't include me, respond to my texts hours later with brief, dismissive messages. When I tried to bring up my concerns, he'd turn it around on me, suggest that I was being clingy, that I was starting to sound like all the other women who couldn't handle dating someone successful. I thought you were different, Maya, he said during one particularly awful conversation. I thought you understood what it takes to maintain a relationship with someone at my level. But you're starting to sound just like every other insecure woman who thinks she deserves constant attention. The end came about 6 months ago, and it was even more humiliating than I could have imagined. Alex called me into his office on a Friday afternoon and told me, in the same tone he'd used to fire an underperforming associate, that he'd met someone else, someone younger, someone who better understood the demands of his position, someone who wouldn't create drama about normal professional relationships. This has been great, Maya, but I think we both know it's run its course. You're a talented lawyer, and I'm sure you'll find someone more suited to what you're looking for. Just like that, 2 years of my life, the destruction of my marriage, the abandonment of my child, and he was dismissing me like I was a temp who'd finished her assignment. I tried to argue, tried to remind him of everything we'd built together, but he just looked at me with this cold professionalism that made it clear the conversation was over. The worst part was having to continue working at the same firm, seeing him with his new girlfriend, pretending like nothing had happened while everyone whispered about the situation behind my back. The same people who'd seemed so impressed by our relationship were now looking at me with pity, like I was just another woman who'd been used and discarded by Alex Morrison. I spent months trying to figure out where it all went wrong, replaying every conversation, every sign I should have seen. The truth was that Alex had never seen me as a real partner. I had just been another conquest, another validation of his power and disagreeability. Everything I'd thought made me special to him, he'd probably said to a dozen other women. Meanwhile, Julian had apparently gotten his life together in all the ways I'd never expected. Friends mentioned seeing him at school events with our son, looking happy and confident in a way he never had when we were married. He'd gotten promoted to head chef at a new restaurant that was getting incredible reviews. He looked good, they said. really good. Like the breakup had been the best thing that ever happened to him. Last week, I finally swallowed my pride and called him. I'd been thinking about our conversation for months, rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd explain that I'd made a mistake, that I'd been influenced by toxic people like Sadi, who'd poisoned my thoughts about what I really wanted. When he answered, his voice was polite but distant. Hello, Maya. Julian, I know this is unexpected, but I've been doing a lot of thinking and I realized I made a terrible mistake. The divorce, the affair, all of it. I was confused and listening to the wrong people. I think we should try again for our son's sake, if nothing else. There was a long pause, and when he finally spoke, his voice had a strength I'd never heard before. No, Maya, we're not trying again. You made your choice and I've moved on. But Julian, you don't understand. I never stopped loving you. I was just scared and stupid. And Alex turned out to be exactly the kind of man you warned me he was. I see that now. We were good together. We had something real. We had something real, and you threw it away for someone who made you feel more important. That's not something I can forgive or forget. I hope you figure out whatever it is you're looking for, but it's not going to be with me. Then he hung up, just hung up like I was a telemarketer or something. The Julian I'd been married to would never have been able to do that. He would have listened to me cry, would have wanted to talk through everything, would have at least considered the possibility of reconciliation. This weekend, his father is organizing some kind of family intervention, trying to get everyone together to convince Julian to give me another chance. I know Julian respects his father, and I'm hoping that hearing from people who knew us when we were happy might help him remember what we had before everything got so complicated. I've been preparing what I'll say, how I'll explain that I was temporarily insane, that losing him and our son has shown me what really matters. I'll tell him about how empty my life has been without him. How Alex was everything Julian said he'd be: selfish, manipulative, incapable of real love. I'll promise to quit the firm if that's what it takes to put our family first the way I should have from the beginning. The truth is, I never stopped loving Julian. I just got distracted by the idea of who I thought I should be instead of appreciating who I actually was when I was with him. Alex represented everything I thought I wanted, but Julian represented everything I actually needed. It just took losing both of them to see the difference. I know Julian's been hurt, and I know I have a lot to make up for, but we have a son together. We have history. We have a foundation that means something. Alex was just a fantasy, but Julian and I built a real life together that has to count for something. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone gets confused about what they want. Sometimes the question is whether you're brave enough to admit when you're wrong and fight for what really matters. I'm ready to do that now. I just hope Julian is ready to listen.